Thank you, Victoria, and welcome to all of you who have joined us for this important conversation today. I want to say that we appreciate Amazon Web Services and Rekor for bringing us this webinar on the State of the Union on digital infrastructure. The issue of digital infrastructure and indeed how we advance our transportation system to incorporate new technologies and innovation is a multifaceted one. It's going to require the participation and input of a large variety of stakeholders representing all aspects of the industry. Today, you will hear from a number of viewpoints representing the private sector, the public sector, and even the federal government. Additionally, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to note that ITS America as an organization continues to develop our own report on a national digital infrastructure strategy, which will reflect the work of our digital infrastructure working group, comprised of leading representatives from all industry sectors seeking to define what digital infrastructure means, crafting a vision for that future of transportation technology, and developing a strategy to achieve that vision. That report is scheduled to be released next month, and there will be some similarities with what you will hear today. But you may also notice some differences between that report and the white paper that led to this webinar, including related to the potential role of the federal government. But I will say I'm encouraged by the large number of attendees at today's webinar, and I urge you all to participate in the conversation that is happening at ITS America among our public and private sector members and within the industry as a whole, as we all seek to advance a shared vision of the digital future for our transportation and infrastructure systems. With that, I'm delighted to turn this event over to Ryan Reynolds, who is the Transportation and Justice and Public Safety Leader at Amazon Web Services. Ryan is a military veteran who began his career in public safety in the United States Army Reserves, and his global team includes leaders who support departments of transportation, DMVs, 911, law enforcement, corrections, courts, and fire and EMS communities. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks everybody for joining the webinar today, brought to you by ITS, AWS, and Rekor. Today, we'll unveil insights from a comprehensive listening campaign that we conducted throughout the first half of 2023 on the true state of the union of digital infrastructure. Joining us today is an illustrious panel of industry experts from both the private and public sector that will delve into the importance of starting small, prioritizing cybersecurity, fostering cross-industry collaboration, like the folks on this call, to unlock federal support, and shifting towards insights as a service for data. Before we jump in, I'm going to do some more reading because my brain is only set on really good movie quotes and dad jokes. And fortunately, the forum for this the latter of which we'll get. So buckle in for some of those. First, leading off our panel is Paul Matthew Zamsky. He's the Vice President of Strategic Growth and Global Partnerships at Rekor Systems, a leader in roadway intelligence for transportation, urban mobility, and public safety. Paul Matthew leads Rekor's partnership and market development strategy, and prior to his role, helped build and launch Waycare Technologies, an AI and smart mobility platform acquired by Rekor in 2021. A graduate of NYU, Paul has led and co-founded several startups across diverse industries before discovering his passion for transportation technology. And what he doesn't want anybody to know is that he graduated with an emphasis on economics and politics, making him probably a good presidential candidate for 2024. Lori Mitkowski is the Director of Connected and Automated Vehicle Services at Gannett Fleming. She's also responsible for directing the CAV business as well as advanced mobility and planning leadership activities. Her career spans over 25 years, starting at age 5, beginning as a traffic engineer and working in both public and private sectors, focusing on intersection of technology, infrastructure, and operations. John Corbin is the Transportation Automation Program Manager for the Federal Highway Administration Office of Operations. He previously served as the Director of Traffic Operations in Wisconsin and Iowa Departments of Transportation. For anybody who doesn't know where Wisconsin and Iowa are, from somebody from Idaho, those are what's known as the flyover states by people who have never been there. In his current role, he's facilitating the development of National Roadway Network digital infrastructure strategy to catalyze coordination among national organizations. Last but not least is Darren Anderson. Darren's Director of Strategy and Innovation for TxDOT. He's responsible for Texas Department of Transportation strategic innovation, emerging technology and research initiatives, and performance analytics and enterprise business processes and strategies, with the objective of providing a forward-thinking, efficient approach for an enhanced future of mobility throughout the state. Thank you all for joining us. We're looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to start off with a start small. It's really a focus on tactical steps, leaning into the white paper and the influence of what we got from the white paper. And what came out of that efficiently was the learnings from other agencies and the successes that we've had already. While some agencies highlight long-term technology investments, most transportation authorities as a whole, especially in the US, are still anticipating years before formal ITS investment plans. So Darren, I'd like to go to you. Being from TxDOT, you're responsible for strategy innovation. So I'd like to know from your experience how agencies balance the push for visionary concepts, really that innovative and outward thinking, with the necessity to address immediate and internal challenges like labor shortages and data utilization.
Thanks, and thanks for having me here today and being with this illustrious group. And thanks for everybody that's joined. You pointed on tactical focus, and as I have been in this role now 9 years, I've actually learned a few lessons, and I think that the driving force is putting the people first, thinking about the people in my case, the state, and then also more internally of the districts and divisions that operate within TxDOT, and really listening to them. And as you get into the tactical piece, what are their day-to-day needs, and how does that relate to technology and emerging technologies? And you have to have that focus so that you have your quick wins, you have your constant movement forward, at the same time that you develop out a more coherent and long-range strategy. I don't remember the general that said it, but in my Army career, there was one that talked about strategic patience and tactical urgency. And it's a little phrase that I use quite often, because even after 9 years, there's things that we thought of 9 years ago that are just now beginning to come into fruition. And so you have to have that patience for a long-range vision and the strategies and programs that support that. And then look at those tactical activities across, in my case, the state, and where those either directly align with those strategies or they complement those strategies, and find those wins and find ones that will move the progress forward at the same time that it's developing out the bigger picture that you want to implement. And I think it's important to make sure that those strategies are holistic, that they cover all the resource requirements that would get you to an actual solvable and long-range strategy that works for your entity. And a lot of times people want to get right to the answer as opposed to make sure that they have everything aligned to achieve what that goal is. And there's a lot of planning processes that you can implement that incorporate all those resource considerations. And then I'd just say program out realistic wins along the way. Make sure that you're not overshooting for your long-range vision without thinking about what are the steps to get there to make that. And that's a lot of project management and portfolio management type concepts. And then I think the final thought I'd say is deploy with the intent to scale. So even though it might be a tactical small deployment, is this something that you see has the potential, should it be effective, to scale broadly, in our case, across the state, or at least across certain regions where it's appropriate? And those are all considerations and discussions we have as we look at a strategy and the programs.
Thanks, Darren. Darren's one of the most humble people that I know, predominantly because what he's done well and what TxDOT has done well is what he mentioned, which is like taking small steps and getting small wins, which I think is a lot of what our agencies, especially in the United States, forget to focus on. We look at the big whale, but what we forget is that the immediate impact on a constituency often comes from a really small win and a small step, and then highlighting that small step and how you can sort of build out in the future. So that's what he won't tell you, but what I will, as what's happened in the growth from TxDOT, even from 2 years ago, and the immense changes in the organization. Collectively, Lori and John and Paul Matthew, from your perspective, what would you give from an advice perspective to agencies that are really sort of ready to get tactical and begin sort of implementing that digital infrastructure journey?
if I'll jump in here. I think, you know, what you said here, Ryan, is key, and Darren is a good example, as you mentioned here, to kind of showcase that, you know, the ability to move forward on small wins that can really showcase success. And I think that coming from the world where we were a startup, right? So you come in from the small, you're trying to make some changes, you're looking at the way things are running within agencies around the US. One thing that really is, you know, pretty prevalent is the fact that you have this analysis paralysis scenario. You have agencies coming together where, you know, they're writing con-ops and discussions on how we, you know, do we implement technology like this today? How do we prepare for technology that is today? And by the time it's already a whole new wave of things that are out there. And it's just something that really is affecting a lot how some of these agencies become pretty stagnant in their current offering back to their to the public and to the roadway users out there. So I think really, as you said here, small is really key, identifying key wins. What are the small things that you can change today as an agency that can make, you know, incremental improvements on the roadway for, you know, roadway? It doesn't have to be roadway, but it could be, you know, in any type of investment in digital infrastructure, mobility as a whole. So we've always been proponent of, you know, not going for the whole big picture, you know, when you're trying to revolutionize the way you're doing things, but thinking about small wins that you can bring to your agency out there and help facilitate that.
Yeah, the perspective that you mentioned also, Paul Matthew, in the way that budgets are written and the way that some of these documents are written is this holistic practice of this is what we think we can do. And by the time those documents get approved, we've moved past the ability to do anything, and also we're outside of the budget cycle. So I think that mentions, you know, that point, and it's also a good segue into what some of the things that we're facing inside of those cycles as well. One of which is cybersecurity. We all recognize now, as we have probably for the last 5 years, that it's mission critical. It's not just a mission critical part of our unit, or part of our systems. It is the mission critical part of how we run the agencies. And we face the agencies in the US especially are facing pressure of safeguarding roadways and intelligence. And we're starting to see good examples, which I would categorize as bad examples in the press, of how some of we've missed that feature. And so facing that with retrofitting what we would consider sometimes as legacy or technology, or enhancing cybersecurity into existing systems, when we have a shortage of skilled cybersecurity professionals. So, Lori, this is your scope of influence, and so I wonder, from your experience in connected and automated vehicle services, could you shed some light on consequences of not prioritizing cybersecurity, you know, specifically in digital infrastructure, and then maybe some strategies on how we can get out ahead of it in integrating those things from the outset?
Sure. Thank you for directing that question to me. And I'm going to answer a little bit differently than maybe you've asked, because this topic is much broader than connected automated vehicles. And I'll answer a little bit from your last question on what might be small tactical wins, because it does tie into this cybersecurity piece. And there's a big education component here for your staff. And that might be a small win, if even just knowing what is digital infrastructure. What does cybersecurity mean? It means a lot it means something different to a lot of different agencies, public sector and private sector. I've worked both in public and private sector, and so I see it from both angles. And now in the private sector, seeing how important cybersecurity is and what it can do to damage your entire system, which we've all, like you alluded to, seen the headlines, but what a foundation it can be for a digital infrastructure, outline. Like, you can implement something like a smart mobility plan for a DOT or a municipality, and integrate cybersecurity with that plan, your fiber backbone, your any ITS planning. Just have an integrative system, educate people on what that actually means. but take the opportunity to really focus on cybersecurity as that foundation. Recently, I was involved with a project of a big city on the East Coast. A lot of casinos are there, but developing an ITS master plan for them, which they had not had many, if at all, any ITS equipment there at all. Some signals, but we were tasked on the team to develop an ITS master plan. I said, cybersecurity has to be number one. It has to be your foundation there, because without it, what do you have to stand on? And there it's a city that's full of vulnerable road users and just a different type of economy than other cities may be. So there's quite a lot you can leverage there by the assets that they have. But I made sure to drive home that point of all the public agencies that were involved in this, that cybersecurity should be a foundation there.
I love
Educated them
Lori's
on that.
I love Lori's examples of a city that all of us know, highlighting all of the points that could be in the Garden State. I don't know if they like it could be, I don't know where they are, but like Darren, you came off mute. I'd like to get your perspective on that as well, about specifically on cybersecurity and maybe like starting from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking as she was speaking, it's about resiliency. It's a key component of that. And we've looked at it for many years now, thinking about catastrophic events, as well as just protecting, if we're going to deploy digital infrastructure and provide information to the public, what are we doing to safeguard that information and to safeguard the receipt and use of that information? And cybersecurity, privacy, and even physical aspects of resiliency are all critical to making sure that that's built in and safeguarded from the beginning of any thoughts on a project. And started long ago in our case with looking at our traffic networks and thinking about, they were traditionally closed systems. Now, if in a digital age, they're much more likely to be open and integrated. So what does that mean in terms of, have we upgraded to all the latest standards? Do we have all the most recent types of equipment? And then what are we doing in terms of securing that? And then beyond that, like I mentioned, addressing privacy concerns within.
There's also an element that you mentioned, Darren, Lori, both you and Darren mentioned, is the changing standards of how we're addressing some of these things. And the influx of what we see from cybersecurity perspectives is way ahead of where we currently have policies. So despite the fact that we want from FHWA, we want to meet those requirements, bad actors are way out ahead of where we happen to be from a policy perspective. And so I think it guides the light on where we would start from. And it really needs to start, to your point, Darren and Lori, on resiliency and really starting from an infrastructure perspective.
Yeah, and I'll just add just quickly. Also going back to that education piece in the IT departments of your DOTs and how sometimes they're not always aligned and don't understand what the needs and wants are for each other. And that really affects cybersecurity and your assets, your physical assets too. So just wanted to add that piece from what I've observed. IT's
got to be a key partner in it. I mean, they have to be seen as an enabler and a facilitator as a part of any activity that's an operational activity, to include deployment.
So yeah, so I'll just interject and suggest there's an additional, I think, lens to put over this discussion, even Darren, kind of your response to kind of the tactical opportunities, and it goes back to this issue of scalability and ultimately national and even continental network extensibility, not just of the technologies, but of the business models for ownership, maintenance, and operation of the operational technology. And there's some great comments. I appreciate Israel chiming in the chat pod, reminding us that there are FHWA, but diversely sourced guidance and tools for discipline in systems architecture and systems engineering. That said, there also are a vast majority of the 25,000, and that's a approximation plus minus, is about 25,000 roadway jurisdictions in this country. The vast majority of them are not on par with Texas DOT or Utah DOT or Maricopa County or other relatively well-resourced, I'll say top 1/10 of 1% of those agencies, right? They're beleaguered local agencies with limited capacity to attract and retain basic staffing, let alone sophisticated systems engineers and systems architects. And it really begs the question, not just what is the nationally extensible technical model, but what is the nationally extensible business model? And how sustainable is a government-owned digital infrastructure strategy or scheme, and what niche should government, state and local in particular, commit to when it comes to ownership and operation of technology? And my advice as a former state traffic engineer would be, don't install what you cannot assuredly securely, reliably maintain and operate. And again, I think that gets to the issue of ensuring cybersecurity in principle, but also learning lessons from failure as well as success when it comes to tactical actions that inform one another.
Yeah, it's a good quote too. There was a director of a Department of Transportation 11 years ago or so, somewhere in the Northeast, that I won't extensively go into where it was, where the governor said, "I think that you're over your skis," and he said, "We've already crashed into the snowmobile. Like we're not over our skis. We're already too far down that road, John." So some of us on the call know who that is, and the mention there and the quote was really what you said, was that they deployed technology that they couldn't control and they couldn't secure. And also, maybe more importantly, that they didn't understand how it was going to be delivered to their constituencies. Going back to what Darren mentioned about, like, this is all collectively combined because there's a conversation about how you get IT involved into the organization and how you recognize that IT understands how we're delivering services to the constituency. So it also, John, that's a really good segue to a collaboration across industries for federal support. So, we draw inspiration from defense industries like defense and aerospace, which really do excel in coordinative efforts, right? I have justice and public safety and transportation under my purview. One of which does a fairly good job, fortunately being on the phone call with all of you, does a fairly good job in starting to think about how that federal, cross state and local lines are become unblurred, one of which doesn't do a great job of that. But there's a parallel where we can sort of draw the collective power to make projects successful. So, in order to truly maximize the impact of innovation and technology, John, how can we do that knowledge sharing that you just mentioned to sort of drive the industry directives?
Yeah, I'd love to make a compelling case for some grand, very expensive national coalition or consortium of some sort that we could all find jobs working for ultimately. But I know, scanning the audience and appreciating other panelists, I would not be able to sustain that incredible assertion. So what I'll do is observe maybe a little bit more organically how I am seeing, or how I've seen, or how I think we could see a more active, almost continuous collaboration environment emerge. And it kind of relatively simply engage, collaboratively assess, in the verb tense of the form of the word vision, and then align, and all those things, engaging, assessing, visioning, and aligning, have to occur from where we are, which is right now a kind of an alignment and partnership among national organizations. And so along the lines of engaging, and I'm not just saying this because ITS America is hosting this, I would say this regardless, if you're not a member of ITS America, even at the individual level, which is feasible, join ITS America and make use of their committee and their working group structure, which is in the process of being updated. If you're part of an organization that already is a member or is deliberating membership, you know, make the jump and experience the benefits of ITS America as really kind of the premier ITS traffic management technology industry group. You know, if you work for state DOT and you have the status to be involved in AASHTO, fully leverage that, or find out who's representing you in organizations like the Committee on Transportation System Operations within AASHTO, or their intercommittee working group on connected automated vehicle technologies, and leverage that investment of your agency and AASHTO membership. There are other organizations that are closer to the individual member accessible level, like ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Transportation Research Board. I'm privileged to be a committee member or member of the Intelligent Transportation Systems Committee of TRB. So engage, and you can engage without getting broad corporate approvals, generally speaking, just to track what's going on. Based on that, and we're starting to see this increasingly, particularly between ITS America, AASHTO, TRB, and ITE, with Federal Highway Administration as part of that community, is assessing, again, what's feasible, what's immediately feasible, what is emerging that's feasible technologically, certainly continuing to look at dedicated spectrum strategies, including 5.9, but also exploring, you know, alternative areas of spectrum to develop. The cellular network, the edge and the cloud, as far as analytical and communications integration capabilities. And again, doing that collaboratively between the partner national organizations, as opposed to TRB doing a project over here, you know, ITS America doing a committee activity over here, I think is vital. But in that assessment component, again, I'll reiterate, not just looking at the technological aspects, but looking at the business model and business case aspects. And one of the challenges of talking about digital infrastructure, specifically as it applies to the transportation system, and even more specifically applies to the national roadway network, is why, right? Why do we want more ubiquitous, secure, reliable national roadway network connectivity? And certainly there are the advantages in the near term of enhanced roadway safety and roadway operational efficiency, but there also, probably with equal significance, are the issues of enhanced emergency response associated with emergency resilience, also associated with military mobility, which was a primary consideration in our last national network infrastructure development, which was by and large the interstate highway system. But there's also supply chain, you know, freight supply chain, logistics management. There's the integration of energy and the electrification of the roadway network, which is more than just bolting charging infrastructure into place. It's ultimately the active management of the interface between the grid, the mobile fleet, and the charging activity. You know, and then there's the broader consideration of, I'll say, three-dimensional intermodal integration, including the increasingly significant ground-air interface, and how ground and roadway traffic management, and particularly lower elevation, lower altitude air traffic management, really almost have to bleed together. So assessing not just the technological component of the challenge and the opportunity, but the business model and business case component, I think are important, are equally important. And then finally, this issue of vision, and I'll try to read the nonverbal cues, Ryan, if I'm getting too long on this. But when it comes to vision, and this is something I'm really excited to be involved in right now, is beginning to understand what it is that is desirable and attainable from the standpoint of, I'll say, communication network latency, and what's needed. Again, not so much worrying about the data, but in the public sector, or in the fleet management, or in the logistics management space, thinking about the insights that are necessary to make the management decisions in an aggressive, competitive way that you or I may need to make. And the issue of latency, whether you need those insights on a daily basis, an hourly basis, a minute by minute basis, or a second by second basis, all of which arguably are attainable through perhaps subject to some enhancement and some better interaction with the telecommunications industry, but all of which are attainable arguably through the cellular network and low Earth orbit satellite and other things, complementing that machine to machine, I'll say super low latency, millisecond level dedicated spectrum connectivity, but looking at kind of what the vision needs to be at national network scale for how that level of service, latency-based, insight-oriented level of service is in effect guaranteed at some point for travelers and shippers across the roadway network. And so engaging, assessing, visioning, and then aligning collaboratively within this, I'll say, democratized national partnership of organizations, hopefully will be informed by what we're developing within the Federal Highway Administration, which is a national roadway network digital infrastructure strategy. Strategy that many on this call, looking at the participant lists, have been informing over the last 2 years, thanks to accelerated leadership from ITS America beginning earlier last year and continuing in some respects culminating, Tim, I know, with the drop of the digital infrastructure strategy next month. But the strategy as it's taking shape, this National Roadway Network Digital Infrastructure Strategy as it's taking shape, is premised on kind of a cornerstone focus on architectural principles and collaborative strategic research agenda, driving kind of an integration of enterprise systems, a focus on accessible insights, and more ubiquitous and reliable national interoperable connectivity for transportation across the roadway network. And more recently, what's really popped, and I'll land at least this verbalization of my response, Ryan, with this, but recognizing, I'll say, rediscovering the significance of subnational multi-state corridors as important test beds and catalysts for state-to-state coordination, whether it's I-10 corridor components being led out of Texas, I-95 in the Eastern Transportation Coalition, I-90-94 in the Northwest Passage, strong interest popping on the I-80 corridor literally from coast to coast. But looking at how we can have more actionable, tactically tangible conversations, but also deployment collaborations among multiple states without attempting to take on the scale of full national network simultaneous engagement and coordination.
Yeah, I would say among multiple states and among, to your point, first, among multiple parties, because there's this company, I can't remember the name of it that comes to mind, that's got thousands of trucks on the road. I think we can, I don't know, maybe they might have a say in helping to deliver packages, but that's a good example of how this collaboration ultimately ends up affecting the constituency as a whole. And the other thing that's really important that you mentioned is the timing of this, because it's the timing of the policies being developed and the way that we're going to go from a digital infrastructure perspective, but also the timing of funding. And so there's a grant funding component to this that we are starting to think about, and they're starting to take advantage of, that we've been indicated by the federal government that's going to finally increase. To your point, John, we saw this is the start of our digital infrastructure, which predominantly focused on highways and freeways in the United States. Now we're starting to get indicators from the federal government that we're going to see additional investment in functional and physical infrastructure. And so, Darren, I know you guys have seen that. Lori, Darren, I wonder, or Paul Matthew, from a grant perspective, are you seeing that the economy being affected, or you're seeing grants becoming more available and things that we might take advantage of?
Personally, I would say, one thing that has been really, really key for us, and just the change from, the probably FAST Act and the IAJ, and how that shift has happened really has enabled technology really to jump in on federal funding at a place that was much more attainable for us than in the past. I think that agencies in the past were really always trying to put technology as a afterthought that would just basically be lumped in and more, a rounding error in a large construction project that they would try to kind of put in, but we've seen it really becoming part of everything that is hitting on the roadway today, and the same as equity and sustainability. It has to be part of whatever is defined over there. And I'll just add one thing that I to kind of before I kind of hand that off, to adding what John was talking about in terms of the collaboration of the federal entities. One thing that's been really interesting from my personal perspective of meeting with agencies across the US and their needs to look for guidance from entities that can help them tell what is the direction. Are we doing what we do? Are we doing what's right? Are we the ones testing out something new out there? I think this is actually how I met John for the first time, was trying to understand exactly what is FHWA and the US DOT's role sometimes in putting these mandates out there, or not mandates, the word, but putting the guidelines out there. And I think that one thing that was become really clear is in terms of besides the fact of helping facilitate the growth through and deployment of technology through grants and other federal funding, is that ability actually to help coordinate a lot of different agencies that are trying to do the same things, but sometimes don't have that peer, that ability to connect the way that we would hope to, and organizations like ITS and the local chapters and as well as other peer exchange efforts have been really key from our perspective to see that, making sure that there's not duplicative work and that there is a concise approach, and that the FHWA helps, not tell the agencies what to do, but help potentially navigate and, keeping all in the same group and making sure that they're all using each other's brain power and everything that they've learned over the years. That's been really, really interesting for us. And I think that that's something that we've seen come out from the ATC MTD, go into the new set of grants that come out, what has been learned to how we can apply it today from our perspective.
I think what that conversation actually looked like was something a little bit more from Office Space, where you called John and you said, what is it that you would say you do here? And and then he answered it with one of his brilliant diatribes, which is here's where I see life from our perspective. And I think that's a good start of how things probably.
That's pretty much it, Ryan. You nailed it right there.
Yeah.
I got my pocket protector. I forgot my pocket protector today. Yeah.
I know. I miss a good pocket protector. I gotta say, they've gone away. They're faux pas now. So I want to get to our last question, so maybe we can get to a couple of questions from the Q&A. We just talked about this sort of world where the data abundance factor is the norm. I think it's important, as Paul Matthews said, to shift from focusing solely on data collection and dashboards and stories to really developing technologies, using raw data, and then also using AI and ML, which we shouldn't forget in this conversation, to turn data into actionable insights. It's something that TxDOT has done really well, which is really a shift from data accumulation to getting it to being used somewhere where you can then kick it back to the constituency as well as the governor's office and say, these are the things that we've seen, and we're now using AI and ML to form insights and use it for decision making. So Paul, from your perspective, I'd like to give you can you provide examples from Recor, or Darren, can you provide an example from TxDOT of where you're seeing innovation and where you're seeing that data and insights being used either through AI or ML? And Darren, I'll go to you first.
All right. Well, going all the way back to the beginning, one thing I left out was agility. First question. And that's important because as we were going through in ITS American, we started asking ourselves, okay, well, what can we do now? That may be our long range vision, but back to the tactical, what can we do now? And one of the first things we did was we went into a statewide data contract with one company and now 3 companies. And that may continue to grow and quickly gained access to a wealth of information that set the conditions for us to be think about how can we use that data. And the next thing we realize is, well, we need tools that can consume and analyze and process this data. And back to the tactical versus the long range, I appreciate the compliment. I think I think many would agree, we still got a long way to go on what we want to do there. But in the meantime, we've gone back to the districts and we've done a number of specific implementations using those data sets to solve problems that they have now, everything from planning to design to safety analytics. Across all the engineering disciplines, there have been applications that we've begun and initiated across most of our districts now. We kind of surveyed them all and asked them, what's your most pressing problem? And if data could help support that, we brought that on to bear. And then AI, I mean, right now that's probably it's the buzz term, right? And so we have a strategy, effort in the works right now. And at the same time, we've done the same exact thing. We're going back out to our districts and reassessing the data that we have and how might AI better, enable us to get there faster or more comprehensively. And we'll be implementing those over the next coming years. And it goes to your question earlier about bringing together communities of practice. I mentioned the districts, but I'll be wrong not to mention that we're tied in with our metropolitan planning organizations, cities and counties, and really try to bring all those together into an alliance of innovative efforts and discuss those in many different forums about how might we advance the whole state, but also advance your regional needs, advance the district needs that support your regions, and what might that look like if we were to try one thing in one area and another in another region, and then take the best successes from each, and then, as I mentioned at the beginning, scale that appropriately across the state.
Yeah, the AI and ML feature is AI unavoidable at this point. To your point, it's become the buzz term. We've collectively joked that we're going to make up another 2-letter acronym that doesn't mean anything. Like, you guys have heard of AI, ML, and VQ, and then not have any sort of like, well, what's VQ? Just to see what the next 2-letter term is going to be of the word of the day. But, Rekor has deployed some significant AI, and they've leaned into that as a technology, even previous to generative AI being the word of the day. So, Paul Matthew, I'm going to give the stage to you to talk a little bit about that.
No, thank you. And no, it's really interesting because when we take the perspective, and I think a lot of times in this world, and I'm, looking at maybe a few people here on the attendee list who know what it is to be that startup trying to navigate, working with governments and selling your technology to governments. One thing that has been really ubiquitous is that you see a lot of companies come in to say, I have this data set, right? And, the data is the new, is the new oil. And people say, well, I have this data set and I can provide you something. How much you want to pay for it? And, buy this data for me. That's something we started seeing a lot over the last 5-6 years, and maybe more, 10 years now. And it was really interesting because when we started hitting the road as Waycare back in the day is, we came in from the aspect of, well, we can have this AI and this insight do something for you, want to buy it from us. And that was actually crash prediction at the time. That was kind of the funny thing. How can we help predict crashes? That was all kind of what we started with. But one thing that became really clear is that what a lot of companies are coming to do and coming to agencies to do is to try to create a problem, and because they have a solution that could solve for that problem, and you're trying to kind of find a way to fit in there. And data seems to be the same way, and you're not really diving into basically the basics of it. Is like what are the biggest problems that you need to solve for. And at the end of the day, the big thing that you have is you have lack of resources. You have people that are staring at many different screens, that have too much work to do. You don't have people running to work for state governments in a lot of different angles. You have a competitive market out there, and what you need is actually the ability to actually support that work with advanced technologies out there. And that's where we came in, and we saw that simply detecting anomalies on the roadway. This is before generative AI. So thinking about what AI was really good at in the early days, not that many years ago, is actually identifying anomalies and identifying discrepancies on the roadways and identifying things that are basically good notifications at things that are wrong out there. And that has been really where we've kind of dove into, is saying, how do we help, with the limited resources, do more work more efficiently, more accurately, and more effectively. And it's from, crash detection to crash response to, a work through, planning perspective and so on. So that's been really where we've been trying to focus on, with the end user in mind. And that's why insights have been much more valuable than trying to say, here's a data set, do you have enough data engineers at Texas DOT to go ahead and figure it out and do a lot of work with, and maybe you'll find some sort of value down the line, for sure.
Yeah, I think it goes back to something that Lori mentioned at the outset, which is we need to define what it is, which is the joke about the AI, is let's go back and define what we're talking about when we say cybersecurity. What are we talking about when we say AI and ML, and the use cases that we see as a successful mechanism to share, to like what John and Darren mentioned, is that sharing and collaboration amongst where we see inside of the United States. Lori, I think, as I said, goes back to your mention of what is it? Do you see any other uses, Lori, or points here where you could add to what Paul Matthew said?
There's a lot. Yes, of course. I would like to pull back the curtain a little bit on this, the federal perspective, by being on the supporting consulting team for John's work, and just drive the fact that, and you all may not know this, but how much collaboration and consensus building went on behind the scenes was amazing. So you're seeing that now in types of conversations like this, in defining what is the definition, if you will, and getting that consensus building. And being from an MPO for the larger part of my career, a lot of what we would do as an MPO is collect different perspectives. So the journey of this digital infrastructure project under the feds, and the previous, the ADS integration ConOps, was a lot of consensus building, a lot of interviewing public, private, IT, OEMs, and doing that. And that's a credit to the feds. And of course, John's here, so I give credit to him as well. But it's really bringing in a lot of different perspectives. And I would say to anybody on this call is to speak up through your community of practice, whether that's IT, ITS America, whether that's AASHTO. Speak up, because your voice is being heard. And we can work on those definitions, what they mean from a broader perspective.
Yeah, I love that, because I think it's up to us as a community to determine what that means. And then, as John mentioned, there are several groups that I think could help to get those definitions out to the community, and so that we can make up our new 2-letter acronym amongst this group that we keep to ourselves. Getting to Q&A a bit, for the more specific questions that were in the Q&A, we'll answer and follow up directly to the individuals. But to kick off, one question I have for the group is, as we know, public agencies are traditionally risk averse. They don't want to make investments in infrastructure that might be wrong. How do we overcome that? Starting small is good, but what else can we do? And I'll just leave it open to anybody who might want to answer that.
I'll jump in. I'm a big proponent of shared capabilities, and I really believe that in this technical environment, I don't know that any one entity or public agency can do it themselves. So on the government side, I think there's a lot of opportunity for working with first responder networks, with education, with a number of other public agencies on what are their needs for digital infrastructure and how those all might be served by some components. And at the same time, in and around where that may be in a city or a region, there's a number of private industry needs for autonomy, for, John mentioned earlier, the advent of drones and eVTOL. And I really strongly believe there will be a nexus at some point of all of these demands driving towards a common or somewhat common digital infrastructure that will help enable a lot of those components. And I think if the resources of all of those entities include the private industry, to include universities that need to do studies based on all of that, that those can implement a digital infrastructure that's much more robust and extensive than our ability to do it ourselves. And that's just the hardware side. I'd add the data side, which is a whole nother environment, but we talk quite a bit about that. How do we work in the data environment together?
That's the next webinar.
Yeah.
Paul, Matthew, John.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate Lori's generous assessment of my role in some of the projects that were referenced. I'll just say, to me, the AI topic drives the point home that I think is just profoundly and entertainingly characterized in the first of the 10 takeaway lessons from the white paper, and it relates to this need to dramatically accelerate the pace of collaboration from research through development and testing and prototyping into deployment and sustainable integration, where deployment, and the white paper also makes this point very well, there's a big difference between installation and deployment. And I think a lot of what we've ticked off and counted on challenge maps and other things as deployment is in fact just installation and not really deployment at all. And so to do that, it really requires, I think, the federal government to continue to take a posture that I've seen not just in the current administration, but in the former administration as well, which is towards what I would characterize as facilitative leadership as opposed to autocratic or authoritative leadership. And yes, there's a room for there's a room for regulations, there's a room for mandate, perhaps, but the first choice should be for this facilitative leadership role of the federal government, in which bringing people together, beginning with research, collaborative strategic research driven by an understandable, visible kind of serpent in the wilderness agenda. I can't see how we progress nationally without dramatically rethinking our collaboration models and the federal role within that government university industry collaboration model. And again, I think AI is almost iconic in just illustrating the accelerating pace of technology, the almost ridiculous pace of adaptation expected of different levels of government to this accelerating pace of change in technology. And it's going to require different models for almost continuous collaboration, particularly between government and industry.
I'll add maybe a more, the more cowboyish approach to it. I mean, from the private sector, obviously thinking about it, if you fail, then just fail, but fail fast, right? Try to get, testing out there as quickly as possible. I think this goes back in combination with, doing small and not waiting for that full overhaul, that 10-year plan, because in that 10-year plan, obviously there's a lot of risk, because if you would put all your eggs in that basket, and that fails, you're going to have a big issue, because you have not taken that into consideration. You have a lot of sunk costs that have come into this investment. So I think, especially looking at the technology that's today, both from the fact that you have data or insights as a service or AI, much more dynamic and software related technologies, it's really valuable to think about getting small, not waiting to get the whole deployment ready to be able to go for it, and have the ability to say that, as long as you're working on through cybersecurity, making sure that personal data is not being infringed upon, they're not creating a safety issue. I think that's kind of the three main issues out there. And everything else, if you fail, you move forward, and that's how we move pretty quickly. And I think from the private sector, that has been something that we try to look at, because if we're too risk adverse, we end up in a situation that becomes pretty stagnant and not innovative in the long run. But again, that's preaching to agencies that have significant responsibilities on their shoulders, but it's something that we try to work with them on for sure.
I think the preaching innovative to technology customers and agencies is a good place to stop. I'm going to get the cut sign, which is either we're running against time or don't tell any more stupid jokes. So thank you for allowing me to MC this, and also for throwing me so many softballs and giving me a bunch of material with which to handle. Really appreciate everybody's time here. I'm going to hand it back over to Tim Drake from ITSA, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ryan. And a special thanks to the panelists today, Paul Matthew, Lori, Darren, in particular, John Corbin, for that convincing call to join ITS America. But seriously, we're always looking to welcome individuals and organizations that represent all aspects of the industry to join us as we tackle the hard issues and the big ideas around transportation technology and innovation. If you are interested in joining, there will be an email address, membership@itsa.org, in the chat, or you can just reach out to me directly if you want to get involved in the conversation at tdrake@itsa.org. Finally, I just wanted to say we appreciate everyone who took the time today to attend the webinar, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you to advance digital infrastructure and continuing that conversation with the release of our report on a national digital infrastructure strategy next month. Thank you all for attending. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.